Welcome to Language During Mealtime. Certified speech-language pathologist and children's book author Becca Eisenberg brings you creative professionals from the language learning and children's education field. With these ideas, parents can help their children with special needs improve language and reading abilities.
Hi, my name is Becca Eisenberg. Welcome to my podcast, Language During Mealtime, episode number 66. Today, I'll be interviewing Leslie Lindsay, author of the book, Speaking of Apraxia. Leslie Lindsay is the award-winning author of Speaking of Apraxia, originally published in 2012. Leslie's writing and photography have appeared in various literary journals. She has been recognized as one of the most influential book reviewers, interviewing hundreds of best-selling and debut authors at her website. Leslie is a former child and adolescent psychiatric R.N. at the Mayo Clinic and at work on a memoir. She resides in suburban Chicago. Visit her on Instagram or Twitter at Leslie Lindsay 1 and definitely check out her Speaking of Apraxia Facebook page. So thanks so much for being here today, Leslie.
Hey, thanks for having me, Becca. It's really a treat. And thank you for that lovely introduction, too. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. I can't wait for you to talk about your new book, which looks, it's actually not looks. I've seen it. It's really, it's wonderful. It's got some great information. And so I was hoping we could start off, because I know that you've written a previous version. And so if you could just talk a little bit about the book and the difference, maybe some of the updates you've done with the with this most newest version.
Sure. Absolutely. So, this book, originally I was writing this book back in the early, 2007, 2008. I was gathering a lot of materials and things then. And now it's 2020 and a whole lot has changed in the speech world and in apraxia and things where we continue to learn all the time. And so what we did was we kind of went through and we sort of overhauled a lot of things. Is this still relevant? Is this not relevant? We found a lot of new resources, a lot of new updates and things that just didn't exist in 2012 when this first book was published. So, 8 years, that's a long time. And so a lot of new advancement and things have come along. That said, I think there's a lot more out there like, social media type things. There are more group chats on Facebook. There's Instagramming, more people are blogging, more people are, doing just like Pinterest. And I think there's a lot more out there for people to kind of get their hands on to get information about speech. So I pulled a lot of those resources and we've got a lot of new different experts that are kind of chiming in on apraxia and what they're doing. People who may have just been in grad school back in 2007, 2008, 9, 10, 12, so I think that those are some of the main differences. So outdated things, gone. Updated stuff, in. Things that are timeless and classic, they stayed.
Yeah, I think that's great too. And I think what's wonderful about your book is that, I think, for parents, they may feel overwhelmed with the amount of information as far as, there's so much information out there and there's so many different ways to connect with other parents. But what's great about your book is that parents could, they could see what resources you recommend and what other experts in your book have said about it. So they're able to kind of, I think, as a parent myself, sometimes I get overwhelmed. There's so much materials, there's so many different opinions, there's so much information and so many different things that what I do sometimes is I just go back to the basics. I just recently, I'm working on this video and I went back to my original textbook. Mm-hmm. Of where I learned a lot of information. And I think that it kind of just brings us back to where, and that's what I like about your book, is the fact that it's very parent friendly and very easy to read. And so I was hoping you could just go through how it's organized and the different topics that you cover in the book.
Sure. Yeah. So I wanted the book to kind of unfold as though it were like you were actually living this experience and you are, as a parent, a caregiver reading, Speaking of Apraxia, there's a reason you picked this book up, you're living it. And I kind of wanted to start with the step one, and maybe step one was noticing that your child's not speaking. Maybe it's even before that. Maybe it's just your child is a baby and they're cooing and not, or, maybe you've got some concerns about their development. And so I kind of wanted some of those things to kind of be there. And then I wanted hearing maybe from someone that you needed to get your child some additional help. Maybe it's a grandparent who's a little concerned and saying, gosh, have you noticed that they're not babbling like the other kids? Or why don't we hear a first word yet? Or maybe it's the pediatrician who's concerned. And so I wanted that experience to be there for the parents that, you've got a friend on your side, someone who's kind of guiding you along this journey. And so there's that. And then there's moving into things like, how do you find a speech pathologist? What is a speech pathologist? Going to that first appointment. And so it's kind of step by step. It's a gradual thing. It's getting the diagnosis. It's how to find the right kind of therapy for you. So I really wanted it to be user-friendly, parent accessible as you're living that experience. So that was important to me because, I am a mom and I know how busy life gets and I know how you worry. And I think that was sort of my goal. And I hope that comes across that way. Also, we go into preschool. So, then we get to the preschool years and then we go into like reading and writing and learning to do those basics, going on into elementary school, dealing with some of the social things that the kids have to deal with just as they navigate their childhood. And then we go even further into like high school years because these kids, they get better, but sometimes the residual of apraxia kind of lingers. And so how can we get through high school? And what about college? And what about, if it's not college, what is it? And how is that going to look for your family and for your individual child?
Yeah, and that's what I like too, is that it's across the lifespan. Because one of the things about apraxia is that it's not always diagnosed at like 3-4 years old. Yeah. It could be diagnosed in elementary school. It could even be diagnosed, in middle school or even later. But also, I think that, we also want parents that have kids of all different ages to benefit from the book. And I think what's also great too is like starting from the beginning, talking about like what is apraxia? Because I think that's for a lot of parents, like as a speech pathologist, a lot of parents don't know. A lot of people don't know what apraxia is. It's not something that you hear of all the time, that you even know what it is. So, and then one of the big things about getting it diagnosed and kind of, but not even just stopping there, really going through the process of also treatment and what that's like. So I know for some parents, if like we're just looking for a diagnosis all the time, but, and the diagnosis is important, but the treatment is also very important too. So I think how parents navigate that, and like what you were saying, it's like a holding hands. And I could definitely see your book, being like a holding hand for parents to help them through each step. And also regardless, maybe you have a parent who's, your child has apraxia. So maybe you've already gone through the diagnosis, but maybe you could benefit from other parts of the book about treatment.
Right.
So,
I think that's a great point. And, just to jump into a little bit, is it's not meant to be read cover to cover necessarily. I mean, you could do it that way if you wanted, but just like you said, maybe you've already gotten the diagnosis, kind of like, oh boy, now my kiddo's, struggling to read. And there's a chapter on that. And you can skip to that chapter. Or, oh, maybe my kiddo is having a hard time fitting into some of the groups at school. There's a chapter on that, And so I think it's over the span of the apraxia diagnosis, basically. So I think that's a really good point that you make. Yeah.
And you have that Facebook page that I think also really helps other parents to connect, to be able to talk about their different experiences.
Yes, absolutely. And they do, and they have, and I love hearing all those different stories and those experiences too. And I think it's great to build that community because we're not in this alone, and that's kind of the beauty of it.
Right. And so one of the things I want to talk about was like, just for parents who are concerned about their kids, let's say, who are not, who they may suspect may have apraxia, from as a parent's perspective and like from your perspective as an expert, writing the book and researching and doing and really speaking to a lot of different experts in the field. As far as red flags go, like what is something that you would, let's say, share with parents that you feel like are red flags for apraxia?
Yeah. And, since I'm not a speech pathologist, I'm certainly not going to be that expert-y. But, for our experience, my daughter, Kate, was very late to speak. So she probably was 4 years old not until she really started speaking in sentences or even just 2-word phrases. So she was a very quiet baby. I think that's kind of a red flag. Maybe a baby who doesn't coo or babble a lot is kind of maybe a little bit of a concern. I can remember going to a new mom's group, and we all had babies about the same time, and everyone's baby was doing all these little babbling at nap time or whatever, stuff. And I'm like, my baby's not, is that a problem? Someone else told me, oh, my little girl said elephant. And I'm like, elephant? What? I cannot even get mama, and so I was worried about that. And I kind of like stuck that in the back of my head and thought, well, okay, it'll come. And then the pediatrician said something to me like, let's look into getting some help for Kate. Maybe she's a little delayed. And I was resistant. So there was that. And then there was, Kate would have had like one word, hi. And it wasn't always hi. It was kind of an approximation, I, but kind of said in a greeting context. She had difficulty imitating things. I would say, let's bounce a ball and say, can you say ball? And no. So difficulty imitating words was one. Quiet as a baby. We also had the kind of the words out of the blue thing happen with us a couple of times. That's where a child might have a phrase or a word that they say one time and then they never say it again. We had that happen to us. And I was like, wait a minute, she said that clear as day, but never again. And so also, I think another huge one that I noticed was a receptive language thing. Like she could hear and understand everything we were saying to her. We would ask, go grab your shoes. Can you get this book for me? Let's have nap time. And she would know exactly what we were talking about, but she couldn't actually say those words herself. So a receptive versus expressive language deficit. But please chime in and let me know if there's anything I missed.
Yeah, no, I think that you really covered it. I mean, I think one of the big points too is to see like that receptive expressive language gap is huge.
Yeah.
Like, because if you're not able, the kids understand, but they're not able to express themselves verbally. But definitely the imitation for sure. Like what you're saying, like saying words sort of out of the blue, they could say it once, but then they won't be able to say it again because it is a motor planning disorder. So some other kids too have motor planning issues with like just parts of their body. Some kids do. Like let's say sports may be difficult, or maybe they can't follow certain movements. So that could be something that could also be it's not speech apraxia. It could be, something with your body or limb apraxia. But those are different things that I've seen over time. Some of my kids with severe apraxia they've like groped where they've really trying to say the word and they really can't. So this is like a lot of the times that I'm discussing with parents about what apraxia is. So I think that, and like you said, like that every child is different. So one child could present with certain, like, they could have some of those red flags. They may not have others. So I'm just, I'm naming and like you're naming it based on your experience and like what you've seen, like just for me also as well, like what I've seen. But it's not like everybody has all the red flags. It's just, but definitely I think something to talk to your pediatrician about, talking to your speech pathologist about, and yeah. So, and I know one of the things that you discuss in your book a lot is the importance of therapy.
Yeah,
treatment.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's just the thing. I know some folks, when we were going through our experience, and, it's been 10 years or so, and they were kind of like maybe grandparents or people who didn't really know much about it. And they would say, well, she'll outgrow it, right? Or this will get better, or, she's just a kid. And, I guess I want to say, no, that's kind of a myth. These kids with apraxia, they're not going to just outgrow it. It's not going to just be one day they just start talking. It does require a lot of motor planning and a lot of speech therapy. And you really have to get to, a licensed speech language pathologist right away and pretty frequently, for this to go away. And you need a lot of home practice too.
Right. And it kind of brings me to my next point, because one of the questions that, or one of the things we had talked about was, how it affects kids during a pandemic and, and virtual learning or doing speech and language therapy via teletherapy. And I think that's one of the great benefits is that we have parents with the kids. As a speech pathologist doing teletherapy, I think that's been one of the benefits is having parents so involved in the therapy versus like, let's say, parent dropping off their child for therapy and not going in the room or just getting their therapy at school. So I think that's another, I find like a benefit is to have like that family involvement.
Agreed. I think so too. I think there's a lot of good parent collaboration nowadays. And I think that's fabulous because maybe before, you're right, it might have been a little disengaged. I know I've talked with some parents going through the pandemic now, and they've said, yeah, at first it was kind of hard because I wasn't really sure what he was doing in speech therapy sessions. But then I jumped on the Zoom a couple of times and I got it. And then we had a lot of fun together and I understood what he was doing and he taught me some things. And so it's kind of been neat to see that. And I think regarding this pandemic, okay, it's tough. I get it. It's hard. But if we can reframe things a little bit and just look at it in a positive light and think, we're not shuffling our kids all over tarnation, we're not going to speech and ballet and soccer and, scouts and, whatever else we need to do. We have more home time. We have more time just to be kind of us as a family and have some of those more basic, wholesome, even holistic, whole child, whole body kinds of things. It's doing the stuff that we never really had time for before because our schedules were so frenetically busy. And now we can get on the floor and we can play with puzzle pieces and blocks and we can, talk about those things. We can categorize them. We can go on longer walks. We can pick up sticks and rocks and we can talk about colors and shapes and textures and things like that. Whereas before, maybe we weren't doing as much as we could have been doing. And so that's the gift I see as far as this pandemic goes. Teletherapy, and you can chime in on that too, because I don't know enough about it, but I think that would be tough if you can't always see each other's mouth if we're wearing a mask that's not clear, for example. And I think that would be tough. So I don't know, what's that like for you?
Well, it is most of the stuff that I work. Well, I do, augmentative communication. But I do have a clear mask and I have worked with a clear mask, with some of my clients. But I have to say, I think teletherapy has been working really well for a lot of my clients. So I think that it is true because they could see my face and we could get pretty close and there's no worries about social distancing on Zoom. So that's the good thing. So I might even get close to the camera and show them my mouth and like how I'm saying it. But I'm also using my augmentative alternative communication. But I think that for a lot of kids, or even having that hybrid where sometimes they're seeing in person and sometimes they're doing teletherapy, I think it's nice for parents to still be involved in that. So they could also carry over, those exercises at home. I think that's really important because you have that direct link. They're already sitting at home. So then being able to directly take some of those recommendations from the speech pathologist and be able to use it right at home. I've even had situations where they're cooking in the background and I'm like, well, do this or model that or say, so it's like you're right actually in the moment with them, which I think is really nice. So I think for me, it's been a great benefit. So my last question was just any sort of advice for parents of kids who are newly diagnosed with apraxia. I know, like, just from like a speech pathologist perspective, like I'll tell parents, like, we don't want to put pressure on the kids to talk. Like if they can't say something, we don't want to make them feel bad about it. I know that's like one of those things that I always tell parents that we have to, like they have to develop, like each word or each sound is almost like learning a new dance. But as a parent, I think you'd be able to really give some great advice to parents. What is your advice on that?
It's tough. And I do shy away from giving strong advice because, everyone is different. Everyone comes to this diagnosis, to this parenting thing with different experiences and kind of a different lens. I get it. And I want to respect and honor that because what works for me might not work for you. Exactly. That said, I get that there's a lot of frustration. I get that. And, parents, I see you, you're having a meltdown in the kitchen because you can't understand what your child wants for lunch. Or, I see you in the shower at night crying and tossing and turning at night because you're not sure if you're doing the right thing for your kiddo. I think being you and being the best parent you can be is really what your child needs. A couple of things that worked for me when Kate would get frustrated with her words and she would be trying to tell me something, I would say, Kate, I know you're trying really hard to tell me something and I'm having a really hard time understanding it right now. I kind of put it on me. I don't understand. Can you show me? And sometimes can you show me would make her feel a little more empowered. And she would, if we were at a place where she could, like, it doesn't really help if you're driving in the car or something, but if you're at home, maybe your child will take you by your hand and lead you to what they're trying to communicate. Oh, I get it now, you might say. I'm so sorry. Or, so I think that validating your child is so huge. Singing with them, dancing with them, being silly, we liked narrating our day. I read a lot of books with the kiddos. We talked about what we saw in the pictures that we were reading. Oh, look at this. The little girl's doing that. And what do you think might happen next? I would ask a lot of open-ended questions. I knew we weren't necessarily going to get an answer, but I wanted to give her kind of the respect or the idea that I'm listening just in case. As far as, so you're newly diagnosed and you're like, oh my gosh, what does this mean? Are you going to be tempted to go home and Google it? Yeah, you are. And our speech pathologist at the time said, don't go home and Google this. You're just going to go down a minefield. And I was like, oh, okay. And, then I wanted to go home and look it all up, you can do what you need to do, I think is my best advice. And for me, it helped to research and understand and read these things. For someone else, it might be completely overwhelming. I think the important thing is to do what's right for you and filter those things out because you can be kind of bombarded with a lot of information. And it's hard. It's hard. You don't want it all. You need to take it bit by bit.
Exactly. Yeah. Just one of the things I do want to add is like what you're talking about with as a total communication approach, that for kids, meaning when I say total communication, it means that we're accepting all different ways of communicating. So I know for a lot of kids, using visuals are helpful, if they're not able to be, if they have a communication breakdown, but gesturing or even using some signs to help augment that is also really important. So,
yes.
But I think that's a really good point. So is there anything else that you want to add before? Oh, one of the things I did want to say is that speaking of Apraxia is going to be coming out in December. Right. And so I'm going to have the link in my post to pre-order the book. So I'm really excited about that. But I just wanted to mention that. And I also just wanted to ask you, Leslie, if there was anything you wanted to add before we finish up today.
I don't know. I can't really think of anything right off other than just keep being you, parents. Keep being supportive of your kiddos, and help let them lead you to make you and them succeed. And really, if you've got doubts or concerns, please talk to your speech language pathologist. They're really there to help. They're a partner.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for today. Thank you. And
Thank you.
I'm excited to share your book, and I'm just thrilled to have you on today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I know I help a lot of parents out there for sure. Like, I think just listening to our conversation, I think helps other parents, because it could feel sometimes, especially during a pandemic, because we're not able to really communicate face to face in the same way, to feel like we have some support. So it's really, really nice, and to feel like other people are going through it. So, well, thank you for listening today. Listen and learn with us at Language During Mealtime.